Hey everybody, it is Wednesday, November 13th. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Winunu on this Wednesday.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Just want to express appreciation, Jill, for the folks on Instagram who have been buying us coffee. I don't know if you're aware of this.
No, tell me everything.
So, of course, we have Mo News Premium, where you get access to the extra podcast and the Instagram account, and people can get annual or monthly memberships. But if you just want to donate one-off, we have that option, and it's through a website called Buy Me a Coffee. And so we posted that. Some people after the election coverage were like, thank you guys so much for getting us through the election coverage. How can I show my appreciation? Some people offering alcohol and gifts, etc. I was like, well, we have this link for Buy Us a Coffee. So for those of you who have sent us gifts on buymeacoffee.com, we're grateful. We'll post the link in the show notes. And I was just asking Jill before the podcast, how would she like her coffee currency? Does she want it in a specific gift card? Or just sort of, does she like to buy her coffee wholesale? Or is she a kombucha gal? And she, I think, will be taking her portion of the proceeds in cash, like a good Powerball winner.
I'll take the lump sum, Moshe.
I'll take the lump sum coffee grounds, just dump them in my front yard.
All right, let's get to some headlines here, starting, of course, with politics. The current president, Joe Biden, is set to meet the next president, Donald Trump, later today at the White House.
And the last president. The last president meeting the current president, meeting the next president. It's only two people.
And who's who so far in Trump's second term?
Yeah, we keep getting the cabinet picks hour by hour here.
Meanwhile, is the Department of Education on the chopping block? What Trump has in mind for the country's educational system? To weather, historic drought is fueling fires across the Northeast as wildfires burn on both coasts. And a follow-up to a story we reported yesterday, the FAA is now suspending air traffic to Haiti for 30 days after at least 2 flights have been hit by gunfire. And Moshe, back to politics. The race for Senate Majority Leader, the first vote happens later today. And AOC, one of the most liberal members of Congress, asked her supporters why some of them voted for her and for Trump. We'll read you some of their answers. A federal judge blocks the Louisiana law requiring the 10 Commandments in classrooms. And Beyoncé going to the Ivies, and we are not talking blue ivy. Yale set to offer a course on Beyoncé and her legacy.
Unclear whether she will appear or they'll just study the tape.
We shall see. And Moshe is on this day in history.
Jill, on this day in history, a song comes out that would become even more famous in this campaign. So your clue is this song became a staple of this presidential campaign. There's a few options for those of you to choose from. You'll find out on this day in history.
Well, if we were sticking with the Beyoncé theme, I would know one, but I guess we'll see. I'm on the edge of my seat. Okay, let's start with the presidential transition, as former President/President-elect Trump is set to meet the current president, President Biden, at the White House today at about 11 a.m. Eastern. This is the customary post-election meeting in the Oval Office between the incoming and the outgoing president. Although last time around, Trump did not host Biden when Trump lost his re-election bid in 2020. Although former President Obama originally hosted Trump the first time that he was elected in the fall of 2016. While he is in D.C. today, Trump's also expected to meet with Speaker Mike Johnson and House Republicans. Not with him, Melania Trump, who declined Jill Biden's invite to the traditional First Lady's tea at the White House. Melania, though, did attend the first time around when she was hosted by Michelle Obama in 2016. As for what to expect in the second Trump term, in just the past 48 hours, Trump has announced a number of major picks. And Moshe, it is notable that this time around he is moving a lot quicker than he did in his first term.
Yeah, he has 4 years under his belt. He has 4 years of watching Biden. And he knew that one of the problems he had last time is he got off to a really rough start, a really rocky start, didn't have the right people in place, they didn't know what they were doing. He didn't expect to win last time against Hillary Clinton. So he had a transition plan from Chris Christie, I think last time. He threw it out a week after he won. And so this time around, they had a plan and they're executing immediately.
Okay, so Tuesday night, a slew of announcements for Secretary of Defense. Trump nominated Fox News host and military veteran Pete Hegseth to serve as Secretary of Defense. And it is a surprise choice. He is a proponent of a non-interventionist America First foreign policy, in contrast with Trump's picks for other top national security roles. Trump, in an emailed statement, called the Fox News host, quote, a warrior for the troops and for the country. This was not one of the names that was being circulated on Capitol Hill, including the House Armed Services Chair Mike Rogers and Iowa Senator Joni Ernst, both who have been steeped in military issues for years and have been working with senior Pentagon leaders. This is going to be Hegseth's first ever job in government.
Yeah. And what a job. It's one of the largest managerial jobs in the world, Jill. We're talking about the Pentagon here, which has an annual $850 billion budget with a B. He would be overseeing 2.5 million civilian and military personnel in 100 plus countries around the world. Typically, you put in somebody, Secretary of Defense, who either has decades of experience in the military as a general, in the C-suite as a CEO, significant managerial experience because of just the immense challenge that there is. So, to call this an unconventional or extremely unconventional choice is probably the accurate description. Now, we should say Hegseth does have military experience. He has served in the Army National Guard in Minnesota since 2003. His unit was deployed to Guantanamo Bay. He volunteered to serve in Iraq and Afghanistan. He does currently hold the rank of major and has received 2 Bronze Stars, along with a couple of other medals. But again, this got a on Capitol Hill, a surprise on Capitol Hill. Now, this is no surprise for those who've been watching Trump for a while. He often will watch people on TV and then select them to be on government. We saw that the first time around with people like Anthony Scaramucci and in the national security realm, John Bolton, who he ended up having a falling out with pretty quickly, along with a number of other folks in his first term. But he might catch them on TV. They're defending him. He likes the way that they talk. And so that is one of the ways that Trump tends to hire folks. Pete Hegseth, a Fox News host, who speaks very kindly of the president, was out there on the campaign trail for him. I'm sure one of the reasons why he went with Hegseth here. His picks, Trump's picks for some of the other slots we've been talking about this week, Marco Rubio for Secretary of State. Again, he has leaked the name. He hasn't officially, as of late Tuesday night, named Marco Rubio. There is some pushback in some of MAGA right-wing world that Marco Rubio is too traditional, too interventionist to be Secretary of State. So we're going to watch that. But he has officially named Mike Waltz, who's a Florida congressman, to be National Security Advisor. Again, a more traditional pick, somebody who's spent time on Congress, on Capitol Hill. Now, notable here, Secretary of Defense is one of those positions that goes through Senate confirmation. So typically, you go up to Capitol Hill, you got to have a lot of one-on-one meetings with senators who have been spending decades on these issues. And so Hegseth, that'll be his first big test, is all these one-on-one meetings with folks on Capitol Hill. And that's where even presidents will run into trouble with their own parties if people up there feel that a certain pick is unqualified. And then if they get through those one-on-one meetings, then there's the public confirmation hearings where you're under the lights, you're on camera. Of course, has TV experience, but you're facing a grilling and questioning from Republicans and Democrats. So we will see how that goes. Republican Party, like traditionally the Senate, will give a new president most of their picks, but sometimes a party takes someone down. Sometimes those people take themselves down. And so we'll see if Hegseth is able to handle the scrutiny here, given that there is some skepticism, well, among all Democrats, but among some Republicans even, as to whether he's the right fit for this job, or maybe he should be coming into the government as sort of an assistant secretary or undersecretary level. The larger concern here is Trump putting loyalty over experience and competence here? That's going to be one of the questions that's going to be asked in the coming weeks here, because this is a big jump for Hegseth, as I mentioned. Another choice getting some scrutiny, Jill, even from Republicans, is South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem. She also campaigned for the president. She has been chosen officially as of Tuesday night as the next Homeland Security Secretary. Trump put out a statement saying he is very excited to have her aboard. Now, Kristi Noem, running Homeland Security, she doesn't have military, border, or intelligence experience. She has run the state of South Dakota, but she's going from managing 13,000 people to 200,000 people and going from a budget of $7 billion to $200 billion a year.
Homeland Security is a pretty wide-ranging department responsible for everything from border protection to immigration. So ICE technically falls under her control, also FEMA and even the Secret Service. Noem is considered a hardliner on immigration. So Noem, along with Trump's pick of Tom Homan as the border czar and Stephen Miller as deputy chief of policy, shows that he is clearly wasting no time in trying to gear up for a major immigration crackdown as he had promised during the campaign. And these officials are already starting to think about executive orders that Trump could issue right away without needing congressional approval. Reuters reports that some ideas include expanding the targets of deportation to encompass people who have not committed felonies, ending temporary humanitarian parole programs, sending the National Guard to the border, restarting the border wall construction, and declaring a national emergency.
One thing Trump is looking to avoid this go-around is the chaos that surrounded the beginning of his last tenure. He had brought in a lot of people. Frankly, Trump didn't think he was going to beat Hillary Clinton. He wasn't quite ready. And so they brought in some people who didn't quite know how to put together executive orders. And it was just, if you recall, just a lot of chaos there in the early stages. And Trump is trying to ensure that this go-around, he doesn't have to deal with that sort of thing. Jill, you mentioned ending temporary humanitarian parole programs. We don't have details on that yet, but those programs do include groups like Haitians, Venezuelans, Ukrainians. So it's unclear how specific they'll get by country, though they have said, in light of that debate in September, that they would be ending the program for several 100,000 Haitians who are escaping the chaos, bloodshed in Haiti, which we discussed in the last podcast. We'll discuss again today, the gunfire that hit a Spirit Airlines plane trying to land there. And so the question will be, which programs will the president end? And what will that mean for potentially hundreds of thousands or even more people who have come into the U.S. seeking temporary refuge from war and issues abroad? As far as Homeland Security is concerned, it is our newest department. If confirmed, Noem would only be the 8th ever Secretary of Homeland Security. Trump, last time around, had several Secretaries of Homeland Security, had several acting secretaries. It was a whole handful there in his 4 years. A number of them were insiders, people who had worked there before, but not necessarily people who were willing to do everything that he asked them to do. They would challenge him on various ideas that he had. And this go around, it's looking like he's willing to pick somebody who has less experience when it comes to the Homeland Security Department and the national security space in exchange for more loyalty. Kristi Noem, very close to him on the campaign trail. Jill, you might remember that rally last month in Pennsylvania. Kristi Noem was the woman dancing next to him as he played music for 45 minutes at his campaign event. So she was literally willing to roll with the motions and do the dance moves on stage alongside him on the campaign trail. And so his hope as he selects some of these people, listen, all presidents want people who are loyal to them. It just so happens that Trump has put more outward emphasis on that as he's picking his cabinet this go around. She was doing the YMCA with him, Jill.
Yes, Moshe, I guess public awkwardness is being rewarded.
I should mention, some of the previous Homeland Security secretaries, like Tom Ridge, the first one, had a lot of national security experience. Napolitano was a border state governor. And then you had other folks who had some defense experience before they took on that role. So bottom line here, he has the troops and the leaders willing to execute his mission, starting on January 20th. Jill, also late on Tuesday, we got the name of who he has selected to be the next CIA director, or at least nominating the next CIA director. That is John Ratcliffe. He's a former Texas congressman from the Dallas area. He served as the director of national intelligence, which is the position above the CIA that oversees all the U.S. intelligence agencies for a few months there in the final year of the last Trump presidency. Ratcliffe seen, again, in line with Trump. He's a skeptic of the CIA, critical of the intelligence community. So we'll see what the culture fit is going to be like there. He's echoed many of the statements President Trump has made about the intelligence community and needing reform there. So we shall see how that goes. Another focus beyond national security, of course, is the economy. Wall Street, business, right now watching who Trump selects for those various positions. One name that had been floated out there, John Paulson, billionaire hedge fund investor, has now taken his name out of the running. The Wall Street Journal reports that Paulson has too many, quote, complex financial obligations. They're seen as an obstacle there to serving in the Trump administration. When you join the cabinet, there's a lot of disclosure that needs to happen. As a billionaire hedge funder, apparently he's been, well, he doesn't want to disclose all of it.
None of your business.
None of your business. A reminder on John Paulson. He made a boatload of money when he bet against the housing market in 2008. He was one of those who said, this whole thing is a house of cards. So ultimately, Paulson out. Another billionaire hedge fund investor in, his name is Scott Bessent. He is a Trump supporter. Funny enough, he worked with George Soros, another billionaire investor, but Soros, huge lib. In fact, the subject of a number of conservative conspiracy theories, basically endless conspiracy theories of George Soros' control of the government for Democrats, etc. So Scott Bessent might be Treasury Secretary, and that would be really interesting. I'd be curious as to how the theories on the right go about that, because if a Democrat, let's say Joe Biden, put a Soros guy in charge of Treasury, oh my God, people's heads would explode because it would just reinforce, liberal Soros conspiracy theories about the world. But now Trump is considering a Soros guy. So I find that very fascinating here. Wall Street appears confident in Trump's choices so far and his direction. You see that reflected in the market, Jill, as the market's been going gangbusters for the past week. I mean, the market's had an incredible year, but especially since the election of Trump here. And so it appears whatever he's been doing or what he has not been doing has assuaged concerns, especially when it comes to tariffs on China, where there were concerns about what that would do to the economy. So we'll have to watch the bond market and Wall Street here for a gauge of how big business is feeling about what's happening in Washington. So far, so good.
And Moshe, we got the first country ambassador announcement, Israel. Donald Trump appointing a very pro-Israel cabinet so far. Trump announced that he'll nominate Mike Huckabee, the former governor of Arkansas, to be the U.S. ambassador to Israel. Trump said in a statement, Mike has been a great public servant, governor, and leader in faith for many years. He loves Israel and the people of Israel, and likewise, the people of Israel love him. Mike will work tirelessly to bring about peace in the Middle East. Huckabee, though, is a relative newbie when it comes to foreign policy, and this does come as Israel is in the midst of a 7-front war.
We should note Huckabee, an evangelical Christian, huge supporter of Israel, has visited a number of times. And as you mentioned, it comes at a super important time in the region. Jill, we should note ambassadors to countries are sort of there to keep the relationship going, but ultimately the big decisions when it comes to war and some of these big deals happen at the presidential and secretarial level, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, etc. Though notably, Trump has already named a special envoy to the Middle East. This is a role that sort of at times was served by his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, Ivanka's husband. This go around, he's got a campaign donor and investor named Steve Witkoff, who is actually very friendly with Benjamin Netanyahu to be the U.S. special envoy to the Middle East. Another role where you're involved in negotiations and help try to cultivate the relationship, prepare the ground for the president to step in.
And then another late Tuesday announcement, Trump says that Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy will lead a new, quote, Department of Government Efficiency, in a statement saying, together, these two wonderful Americans will pave the way for my administration to dismantle government bureaucracy / excess regulations, cut wasteful expenditures, and restructure federal agencies. So Moshe, Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, Doge, get it?
Oh, I do. I'm sure there is no coincidence there. One of his favorite cryptocurrencies, Elon Musk, is Dogecoin. And so now, as opposed to calling it the Office of Government Efficiency, because it's not a department, let's be clear. A department has to be approved by Congress, Department of Energy, Department of Interior, Department of State. Department of Government Efficiency is a office that Trump has created here, and it clearly gives Ramaswamy, who's a surprise pick here, this is only supposed to be Elon Musk, so it's like Ramaswamy and Musk here, basically researching and putting together a report of things the government can be doing more efficiently and who to fire. Now, keep in mind, anything they recommend, and Trump has given them now 2 years to put together this. He says you have a deadline of July 2026, the 250th birthday of America, to put together this report. Once that report is done, then it has to go to the various departments. Then it has to go through Congress. So if he's like, I think that we should, fire all the people they say we should fire. Well, you know who makes those decisions? Congress. And we know that government historically isn't very good at deleting. They're very good at adding. That's generally the math you do in government. You spend more money. You don't spend less money. So we shall see what the slashing excess regulations, wasteful expenditures, what role they have here. One potential role this also serves is, we talked about Susie Wiles yesterday, the chief of staff, trying to keep the quote unquote clown car away. This also gives Ramaswamy and Musk like something to do. That's not a official department agency. That's not an official cabinet department, et cetera. So maybe this serves her purposes as well. Like, keep those guys busy. They can call Trump all they want, but ultimately it's unclear how much power they'll end up having at the end of the day. Now, I will say this, at the same time, the government is hugely inefficient. It wastes hundreds of billions of dollars every year. We've talked about this. Literally, the Pentagon can't find like $100 billion every year that it's spent. Like, it can't account for it. So there's a lot of work to be done here. I wish Musk and Ramaswamy luck as a taxpayer. I would love for my tax money to be spent more efficiently. We'll see if this is more effective, as effective, or less effective than many recent government commissions.
Okay, now to a story that dozens of people have been emailing us about at Mo News. It is also in line with what's in store for a second Trump term, but we want to talk about potential changes to the Department of Education. Trump has said that he wants to get rid of the Department of Ed entirely. So we wanted to just take a reality check here. Now, this is something that Republicans have been talking about on and off for decades, pretty much since 1979, when the Federal Department of Education was first created by President Carter. So just like when it was created, any plan to do away with the department would need congressional approval. And even with Republicans controlling the Senate and the House, it is not likely that there would be enough support to abolish the agency. In the Senate, a supermajority or 60 senators would have to be on board, which makes this pretty much impossible.
And Jill, there was a recent vote in the Republican House related to this. And even there was no unanimity. About 60 Republicans voted with Democrats against abolishing the Department of Education recently.
So Trump has a lot of arguments here for kind of like what his beef is with the Department of Ed. He points out that the U.S. spends more money on each student than most countries and scores pretty low in comparison, has worse results. He said the Department of Ed has become a tool of, quote, woke culture war. The goal would be to return the mission of education to the states. Most parents out there know that this is kind of the situation already, at least for K through 12. The federal government doesn't have that much of a role for the most part. The lion's share of school funding comes from state and local governments, which are also responsible for school policies and curriculum. So what does the Federal Department of Ed do? Well, they provide about $18 billion in funding to high poverty K through 12 schools, and about $15 billion to help cover education costs for students with disabilities. And the Federal Department of Ed also plays a very big role when it comes to funding the nation's colleges and universities. So what does the Federal Department of Education do? Well, they provide about $18 billion in funding to schools that have a high percentage of students living in poverty. Another $15 billion to help cover education costs for students with disabilities. And the department also plays a pretty big role when it comes to funding the nation's colleges and universities.
Yeah, and then there's the big kahuna. The department oversees a $1.6 trillion federal student loan program and sets rules for what colleges must do to participate. It collects national data on enrollment, crime in schools, staffing. It's also responsible for enforcing civil rights laws that bar discrimination in federally funded schools on the basis of race, sex, and other factors. That's something the Biden administration has used to ban schools from discriminating against students on the basis of gender identity. Now, Trump could do the opposite here, and that's what makes this whole idea of abolishing the Department of Education interesting because there's definitely ways he will look to utilize the tools and the laws that are currently administered by the Department of Education. Jill, I won't be surprised in the next week or two if we hear his nominee for Secretary of Education. And that's why I've told everyone to hit pause a bit on this talk of abolishing the Department of Education. Trump may use those civil rights laws to actually bar schools from allowing biological men to compete in women's sports. He could also pressure schools to address anti-Semitism on campus. He's been very critical of DEI at universities, threatening to cut federal funding for any school or program that pushes ideas like critical race theory, gender ideology, etc. It's been a major part of his stump speech. Now, Republicans have always been very into universal school choice for American families. That means providing public subsidies for private school tuition or other educational expenses like homeschooling outside the system. Because the way that we fund schools here in America is all based on your property taxes, and you don't have much of a choice in most places of where that money goes, even if you don't send your kids to those schools. So we are in a situation here where we have 4 decades of Republican rhetoric about abolishing the Department of Education. It does not appear likely, I have to say here, in November of 2024, Jill. We should note the Department of Education controls about $200 billion annual budget. Now, the majority of that is financial aid. It's mandatory spending. About $70 billion annually is discretionary, meaning they can spend on whatever they want. And the last go around, Trump has been talking about abolishing the Department of Education here since the first term. He had Betsy DeVos, the education secretary. She tried to dismantle the department from within through budget cuts, basically a death by 1,000 cuts, as opposed to officially abolishing it. Now, the issue that they dealt with was even with a Republican Congress, it's hard to do. That's the thing about Congress. They all have certain interests in this sort of thing. And even Republicans who speak openly about this are like, well, but that program's important to my town, and that program's important to my town, and that program's important to my state. So they had trouble even getting any real budget cuts through. So we'll see. I think there might be some cuts to the discretionary budget there and a realignment of priorities. But even with the Republican Congress here, not clear that they can remotely go anywhere near abolishing the department. The bigger question will be what sort of budget cuts and what sort of reallocation of resources might happen within the department. And so we'll look to see who he appoints as the Secretary of Education and how he utilizes it, prioritizes it, or deprioritizes it in the coming years. And Jill, one more takeaway for everybody. The $200 billion figure sounded big in terms of the Department of Education, the federal Department of Education. 90% of funding to schools comes from local and states. So that number actually represents 10% of overall spending on education there. So just for context, to the point you brought up earlier, we spend a lot here in American education. Is it well spent? Can it be made more efficient? I think there's a lot to be desired there. The question, of course, is can it be done through the system, through reforms to the system, as opposed to blowing up the entire system?
Well, Moshe, as a suburbanite living in the wilds of Long Island, I could tell you our property taxes out here are pretty high. And most people put up with it because it goes to the schools. And that's what you move out here for. You want your kids to have a good education. All right, time for the speed read from NBC News. Firefighters on both coasts were battling fires after thousands of acres burned in New Jersey amid a historic drought and after strong winds last week sent a fire howling through Ventura County, California. The late season fires come just a few weeks before Thanksgiving and are a reminder that wildfires are quickly becoming a year-round hazard in the United States. In California, the mountain fire in Ventura County had grown to just over 20,000 acres or 32 square miles. Ventura County fire officials say the fire was initially pushed by the famous Santa Ana winds, which gusted up to 80 miles per hour. They described the challenging conditions like trying to, quote, put a blowtorch out with a squirt gun.
Yeah, in California, they used to have a fire season between spring and fall. Of course, we're still here in fall, but more and more we've seen the fires stretch into December and January and February, the 24/7, 365 fire season. And then you have this here out on the East Coast, 2,500 miles away. New York and New Jersey are dealing with a number of fires that are burning in rugged terrain that have been parched by drought here in the Northeast, where we've received little to no rain in the past couple of months. Tragically, the fire in the Northeast has already killed one person, a New York Parks employee, over the weekend. There's a wildfire called the Jennings Creek wildfire burning in New Jersey right now, as well as one across the border in Orange County, New York.
All right, now to a follow-up to a story we first mentioned yesterday from Fox Business. The FAA has suspended flights between the United States and Haiti after a Spirit Airlines flight and a JetBlue flight were both struck by gang-related gunfire. There are also reports that an American Airlines flight was also hit by gunfire. The FAA issued what's called a notice to airmen about the suspension Tuesday afternoon. It applies to all U.S. carriers and commercial operators, and there is a possible exception for emergency flights, but this would be for 30 days.
The sad thing here, Jill, is that some of the cargo aboard the commercial jets, as well as cargo planes headed there, has humanitarian supplies for a country that is in dire need of them. So that's going to hurt aid groups. That's going to hurt the people on the ground there. The government there, whatever you can say about that government, which keeps changing out leaders and at times has to answer to the gangs that are running Port-au-Prince, says they will bring the perpetrators to justice. Unclear whether they can make good on that promise. The gangs have been going around clearing their friends out of prison over the course of the last year here. So we told you about that Spirit jet that was hit by gunfire. The JetBlue flight 935 was also struck by gunfire while departing Port-au-Prince, and that plane was able to make it safely to JFK later in the day. So just a especially concerning situation, and a story we'll continue to monitor here.
Okay, back to politics. Let's turn to an election day on Capitol Hill, the race for the Senate Majority Leader. So right now there are 3 senators at the top of the list. We've got Senator Rick Scott of Florida, Senators John Thune of South Dakota, and John Cornyn of Texas, and they're going to be subject to a vote by their colleagues. Okay, but here's some reporting from Axios. Republican Senator Rick Scott may be the MAGA media darling, but some of his colleagues are apparently annoyed at the public pressure on their secret voting process. So they're trying to elect a replacement for Mitch McConnell later today. Scott appeared to have momentum over the weekend among MAGA social media and Trump allies online, although President-elect Trump has not openly endorsed Scott. But it looks like some of the tweets from right-wing media could backfire. Many senators wanted to avoid turning a secret ballot into a public spectacle, and they feel bullied by the online chatter. Senate offices are dealing with a flood of trolling on social media from Scott allies, while Scott campaigns for their votes, and that has left many of them apparently pretty frustrated.
Yeah, so just a reminder here that, we elect members of Congress, we elect senators, voters do in America, and then they all get to Capitol Hill and they got to elect their own leadership team. And they do that via secret ballot. That's on the House side, on the Senate side, the majority side, the minority side. And that's how they do stuff. The vote in the Senate today is literally 53 people. 53 Republicans, the majority, will hold a vote. It's like, electing class president effectively. It's done via secret ballot because the idea is that the public doesn't really understand how leadership and legislative tactics work, and you want to elect the person who's the best tactician. It's one of the reasons, whether you love him or you hate him, Mitch McConnell has been so successful through the years, is that he knows how to get legislation through. He knows how to get nominees through, which is one of the ironies of the fact that him and Trump hate each other and he hates Trump, is that no one did more for the Trump agenda in the first term in terms of getting him the Supreme Court nominees, his legislation through, than Mitch McConnell. But he's viewed skeptically. Who is seen in line with him? John Thune and John Cornyn, the 2 Johns who are running today. They come from McConnell's team. They know the tactics. They know how things work. And so they were considered the front runners here. Now, Rick Scott is a Trump loyalist here. He's a senator. He's actually blamed in 2022. He was running the campaign arm for Senate Republicans. And the fact that they did not get the majority, they blamed on Scott. So a lot of them are like, man, he's not a good leader. He doesn't know tactics. But Trump likes him, and the people around him like him. And so that'll be a big question today as to how much influence Trump and the people around him can exert on the Republican Senate, who many are very loyal to Donald Trump. They very much like Donald Trump, but they also are like, let us do our business here in the Senate. We know how this place operates. And so we'll watch this vote today. Again, 53 senators, secret ballot. The winner needs to get a majority of the 53. If in the first round, first couple of rounds, nobody gets a majority, the weakest link goes, and it goes to a round of 2. And then whoever wins that becomes the next leader. So that's something we'll be watching here. If you're really into politics in Washington and you watch the Sunday shows, you'll be seeing either Cornyn, Thune, or Scott on a lot, depending. One thing that McConnell had going for him was that he really knew how the Senate operated. He wasn't much of a media figure, but he would come on, he would make some news. Of course, with his health issues of late, etc., he decided to step down after many years leading that caucus. And so we'll watch this, and this will play a major role when it comes to Trump's agenda.
And one more political story from Business Insider. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or AOC of New York, a strong backer of Kamala Harris, and one of the most progressive voices in the U.S. House of Representatives, took to Instagram over the weekend asking for feedback from people who backed her reelection in New York's 14th congressional district and also voted for Trump. She is the leader of the so-called squad of progressive members. She won her district, which is in the Bronx and Queens, by a 38-point margin. But it came as some voters in her district and other heavily blue areas moved towards Trump at the top of the ticket this year. In 2020, Trump won 22% of the vote in AOC's district compared to Biden's 77%. Harris did not fare nearly as well this year. Support for Trump jumped up to 33%, and support for Harris dropped to 65%.
Yeah, so AOC wanted to get to the bottom of this. She's like, listen, 2/3 of you still supported Harris, but 4 years ago, 3/4 of you supported Biden. How is it that some of you both vote for me and vote for Donald Trump? How can that be? And so found it very interesting how she's using Instagram, similar to actually how we are using Instagram here at Mo News. And it comes as we didn't just see this trend in her district, right? We've talked about this. Areas in Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, Chicago, Milwaukee, a move to Trump in blue areas. Again, him not winning the majority in those areas, but cutting into the Democratic advantage in those areas. So she asked the question, and she got a lot of responses and then posted them. Two key issues people brought up: the economy and the war in Gaza. A number of the responses AOC posted here include, quote, this is somebody explaining their vote for Trump and AOC. It's real simple. Trump and you care for the working class. Another person, quote, Trump is going to get us the money and let men have a voice. You're brilliant and have amazing passion. Another person, I feel like Trump and you are both real. Another person, you are focused on the real issues people care about, similar to Trump populism in some ways. So you sense a theme there. They're looking for authenticity. They're looking for people who feel like they're looking for politicians who are talking about their pocketbook. So that was one theme. And then a bunch of people wrote, I know people that did this and it was because of Gaza. Another person said, because of Gaza. Another person wrote, I voted for Trump and Dems because he reached out to Muslims. So that's a fascinating decision there by a number of folks. In light of the fact, you might have been listening earlier on this podcast, you got Mike Huckabee, ambassador to Israel, the envoy to the Middle East, is close friends of Netanyahu, Rubio, Stefanik, and Waltz, the three names that were named yesterday to State National Security Advisor and the UN, also very pro-Israel, which has some people saying, wait, why would the pro-Gaza, pro-Palestinian people vote for Trump here? Well, one thing is he kept things pretty vague during the campaign. And another reason basically is they wanted to punish Biden and Harris here. And, you saw some of the media reports in the lead up to this. Hey, you know that if you vote that way, that might help elect Donald Trump. And the people said, well, we still have to take a stand and we can't reward the behavior of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, despite what may happen under a President Trump. And many of them didn't necessarily vote for Trump. So that's an interesting phenomenon here, as some people voted with the last 4 years in mind as opposed to the next 4 years.
From Reuters, a federal judge in Baton Rouge, Louisiana on Tuesday blocked the state's controversial 10 Commandments law, which would require all public school classrooms to display an 11 by 14-inch poster or framed picture of the directives. It was supposed to go into effect on January 1st. The judge said that the law is unconstitutional on its face, and he cited a 1980 U.S. Supreme Court decision that struck down a similar law in Kentucky for violating the First Amendment.
So Louisiana is the first state that's been trying to enact this kind of 10 Commandments mandate in more than 40 years. Kentucky tried to do it back then in the early 80s, and you mentioned Supreme Court struck that down. But this bill was signed by the Republican governor there, Jeff Landry, in June. He said he was excited to fight for it. He's like, bring it on. So far, it has been brought, and they have lost, but they will be looking to appeal this to the Court of Appeals there, a very conservative Court of Appeals in the Fifth Circuit. This may end up going to the Supreme Court, so we'll watch to see what happens there. Just after he signed the bill, 5 days later, 9 families, including several clergy members, filed a lawsuit in Baton Rouge to block the law. Jill, we've heard from a number of Louisiana residents, including Republicans, including members of the religious community, including a number of religious members of our community, people who are Christian, Catholic, in a variety. People who are Protestant, Catholic down there in Louisiana, who say that the Ten Commandments has a place at church, at temple, at home, but not in the classroom, feeling that a separation of church and state does need to be maintained at public schools. So it'll be very interesting to continue to watch this case wind its way through the court, see how the Court of Appeals rules. If they rule the other way here, then we have an interesting case for the Supreme Court to take up in the coming session.
And finally, from The Guardian, students at Yale University are getting the chance to take a class entirely devoted to Beyoncé. The class is called Beyoncé Makes History: Black Radical Tradition, History, Culture, Theory, and Politics Through Music. It will be taught by the African American Studies and Music professor Daphne Brooks, starting in the upcoming spring semester. Brooks co-founded Yale's Black Sound and the Archive Working Group. She previously taught a class called Black Women in Popular Music Culture at Princeton, but this will be her first class focused solely on Beyoncé, who has won 32 Grammy Awards and has reached a level of political influence that few in the music industry have.
So a class devoted to a musician is not new. There have been courses apparently taught at a number of universities on Taylor Swift, Lady Gaga. Harrison Ford has a course, and not to be outdone, Jay-Z has a course. Jill, I remember covering the Jay-Z course at Georgetown when they launched that back when I was covering, back when I was in Washington for CBS News. I remember like, oh, there's a Jay-Z course at Georgetown University. And so, as Jay-Z said, I'm not a businessman. I'm a businessman.
Well done, Moshe.
I'm just trying to do my best. And so I think, part of this course is the idea that you're not just studying, someone's music, but someone's business, impact on culture. Brooks apparently intends to use the performer's repertoire, including footage of her live performances. She will not be on tour while she teaches this course. And she'll be using that to look back at Black intellectuals like Frederick Douglass, Toni Morrison, philosophies of Black feminism, Black liberation. And so we'll see how it does. Apparently, it's drawing a lot of interest here. There was also a Harvard course on Taylor Swift that apparently was very popular this year. One thing I noted on Instagram, though, Jill, the tuition at Yale this year, not everyone pays it. But for the people who do pay it, $91,000 a year. So this does come at a time where higher education is under scrutiny, questions about whether they're properly preparing students for the real world, the diversity of thought in the real world, which includes centrist thought, which includes conservative thought, and campuses like these Ivy League campuses are under scrutiny for a variety of reasons, including courses like this. Is this the proper preparation we should be giving our college students? Jill, it's a discussion we had in our Mo News editorial meeting yesterday morning.
And the consensus is?
There is no consensus. We're having a debate. I think some of us were like, yeah, this is, just a fun course. And like everyone needs like a nice fun course every semester. And others among us, I was playing the devil's advocate here, being like, come on, Yale University preparing like the next leaders of the world. Like, shouldn't we ensure they're getting, an extra course in economics or something like that, as opposed to a Beyoncé philosophy course? But listen, I know there's a variety of opinions out there. But it's interesting because it's courses like this, especially in light of where we are as a country, that's leading to folks saying like, Yale, Harvard, should you be adjusting your curriculum to ensure your graduating classes are, plugged in?
Right. There's been a lot to ensure that there is diversity in terms of demographics, but is there diversity in thought? Not really. As we know, that it's very difficult to be a conservative on a college campus these days, particularly an Ivy League college campus. But Moshe, fast forward 18 years, baby Olivia says, guess what I'm taking this semester in college as you're paying the bills.
Dad,
Are
why
you
haven't
happy?
you paid spring tuition yet? I'm like, I looked at your class schedule and I don't approve of that class you're taking on Friday mornings. No. I know already at age 1, Olivia will be taking all the most important courses,
of course,
with a side of fun. We can't just take exclusively Beyonce courses, though.
It does feel like the Beyonce course, and please don't kill me for saying this. It feels like it could be like a 3-part podcast series versus does it need to be a full course at Yale?
Right.
I don't know.
Is there a lack of information on Beyonce out there? Do you need to be using up a couple of credits one semester to devote an entire semester to it? But listen.
By the way, I would say that as well about Taylor Swift, Lady Gaga, Harrison Ford. I don't even understand.
I mean, the Harrison Ford course sounds amazing. You just watch like the Indiana Jones movies. Is that what that class is?
I'm totally confused, but okay.
Listen, if you're going into music, anyway, we digress here. If you're going to music, it totally makes sense, but it is what it is. On this day in history, 1956, the Supreme Court rules that racial segregation on buses is illegal. On this day in 1982, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial opens up in D.C. It lists the names there of the more than 58,000 Americans who died in the war. It's down there on the National Mall, Jill, right next to the Lincoln Memorial, the Korean War Memorial, a very powerful experience. Jill, on this day in 2001, just a couple of weeks removed from the terrorist attacks of 9/11, the U.S.-supported armed group, the Northern Alliance that was fighting the Taliban, takes control of Kabul. And so the Taliban would not have control of Kabul for about 20 years there. But then, of course, we all covered it in August of 2021 as the Taliban would take control back of Kabul and the entirety of Afghanistan as the U.S. withdrew. And we end here with a bit of music news. On this day in 1968, the Beatles' Yellow Submarine opens in U.S. theaters. The Beatles there were making their albums and making their films around those albums. And the answer to your clue at the top, Jill, this was the song Donald Trump would play at the end of every single rally. And now there's viral clips online of Jair Bolsonaro, the former leader of Brazil, making videos dancing at the YMCA, frat houses across America dancing at the YMCA dressed in Trump red ties. It's become like he's revived it, YMCA, beyond the bar mitzvah circuit. If you're ever to bar mitzvah, they used to play YMCA.
From like the 90s.
Right. They were playing it there at like kids' parties, and Trump has made it a staple again. At least brought it beyond what it was.
All right. Well, there were only a few songs that would have fit the bill of like campaign 2024.
Right. Like
Beyonce's Freedom and YMCA. And all right, Village People, thank you for keeping it interesting in 2024.
Thank you for your contribution to the 2024 campaign cycle.
All right, everyone. Thank you for listening to the Mo News Podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And review us in the App Store.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow.